Right, we're gonna do part A of the inspection. On part A, you're gonna have the engine compartment to the front axle. So you will stand in front of the truck and you start from the way up and work your way down. You will say your marker lights. Every time you say in a light, you gotta say identify the color. You gotta say that the lens is not cracked, the bulb is not broken, it hasn't fall out to be missing, and when you turn them on, they're working properly. They light up, working properly. So all you would have to say, my marker lights, amber in color, not cracked, not broken, not missing, working properly. My turning signal, 4 ways, and parking. Amber in color, not cracked, not broken, not missing, working properly. My headlights, clear in color, not cracked, not broken, not missing, working properly. I will then check the level of the truck to make sure they have no suspension problems or no flat tires. I will look underneath the truck and I'll make sure there's no puddles, so the truck is not leaking. There's no wires or holes exposed. Now we work ourselves into the engine compartment. The instructions of the test, they're gonna say, do the driver's side. If there's anything different on the passenger side, you will inspect it and then go get the driver's side. So we're gonna start in the passenger side with the engine coolant reservoir. It's properly mounted, securely tight, not cracked, not leaking, and it must be on full. Every time you're talking about a reservoir or a tank, must be on full. The cap, it's securely tight, sealed, not cracked, and not leaking. You follow the hose from the reservoir and that leads you to the water pump. But when you inspect it, you're gonna say all the hoses for the water system is secure tight on both ends. They're not cracked, not frayed, and not leaking. You follow that particular hose, it leads you to the water pump. The water pump is securely tight, properly mounted, not cracked, not leaking, working properly. The water pump is gear driven. You then now come to the driver's side. And we work our way into the motor. Since the first thing we see here is the oil fill and dipstick, you say my oil fill is securely tight, not leaking, and the dipstick, if I pull, must read full. I then go to the alternator. The alternator is properly mounted, securely tight, no bolts missing, with no signs of rust trails, working properly, and my alternator is belt driven. So then I would inspect my belt. The belt, not frayed, not cracked, no damage, securely tight. If I pull on it, has no more than 3/4 inch play. I then go check the connections on the wires of the alternator. Both wires, positive and negative, should be securely tight, not cracked, not frayed, and no wires exposed. I'll then go underneath the alternator to the air compressor. The air compressor is properly mounted, securely tight, no bolts missing, not cracked, not leaking, working properly. The air compressor is gear driven. Then I will check the hose and lines of the air compressor. All the hoses and all the lines, they're securely tight on both ends, not frayed, not bent, not leaking. The lines are not bent, not cracked, and have no air leaks. The holes are not frayed and have no air leaks. Underneath the air compressor is the power steering pump. The power steering pump, it's also gear driven. I'm making sure it's properly mounted, securely tight, working properly, and not leaking. I will follow this hose from the power steering pump to the reservoir. When I check all the hoses, I'd say all the hoses for the power steering system are securely tight on both ends. They're not frayed, not cracked, and not leaking. The reservoir is properly mounted, securely tight, not cracked, not damaged, and not leaking. And it must be on full. The cap of the reservoir for the power steering system must be securely tight, sealed, not cracked, and not leaking. Since I check all the hoses already, that takes me to the gearbox. The gearbox is properly mounted to the bracket by the frame. All bolts securely tight, no signs of rust trails, not cracked, not leaking, and it's working properly. The gearbox operates the 4 linkage arms. 1, 2, 3, and 4 that conducts to the other side. All 4 linkage arms are properly mounted, not bent, not cracked, no signs of illegal welds, and they're securely tight with the casa nut and pins. The casa nut and pin has no rust trails and cotter pin not missing. Behind that casa nut, there is the bushings. The bushings are made out of rubber, so the rubber is not cracked, not frayed, and have no grease leak, and they cannot have no free play. Now let's go to the suspension. We go to the leaf mounts in the suspension. The leaf mounts, there's one in the front and one on the back. They both securely tied to the frame, not cracked, not bent, and have no signs of illegal welds. The leaf springs are securely tied to the mounts on both ends, front and back, not cracked, not bent, none missing, and should have not been shifted. The U-bolts, they are tightened with the nut on the bottom to the bracket securely tight, not cracked, not bent, and they're properly mounted. We then have the shock absorber. The shock absorber properly mounted to the top and bottom securely tight, not cracked on both ends, and the shock absorber bottle not leaking. Let's go to the brake system, starting with the air hose. Fittings on both ends must be securely tight. The hose not frayed, not cracked, and not leaking. The hose takes air to the brake chamber, so the brake chamber is securely tight, properly mounted to the bracket. The clamp around it is securely tight, no air leaks, and working properly. The slack adjuster, push rod, and pin. Slack adjuster working properly greased, push rod not bent or cracked, and cotter pin not missing. With the engine off, brake relief, no more than 1 inch slack play. Slack adjuster operates the brake drum and shoe. So we make sure that the shoes has no excessive wear, less than 1/4 inch. There is no debris in between, no oil leak from the inner hub seal, and the brake drum has no heat cracks and no excessive rust. We then have the tire. The inner and outer walls of the tire has no cuts, no bubbles, and they're not leaking. The tire tread must be worn evenly, no less than 4/32 thread dead, and the steering tire cannot be a recap. It has to be a new tire. We then go to the rims. The rim on both sides, in and out, the edge cannot be bent, not cracked, and no signs of illegal welds. The lug nuts, all of them securely tight with no rust trails, and none of them can be missing. We then go to the hub seal. The hub seal must be securely tight, all bolts in place, not damaged, and not leaking. If we have an eyeglass, it should be on full. We then have the valve stem. The valve stem cannot be bent, not cracked. It should always have a cap on. And with the tire gauge, you make sure it's properly inflated to the spec of the manufacturer. That was part A. Part A of the inspection.